very peaceful.
You sit wherever you are comfortable. I'll sit beside you. That would be great. It's a bit of an intimate group.
Thank you so much for humoring me by sitting in the front row. I try this at church and it's not usually successful. My name is Judith Visser and I serve in ministry with Midhurst United Church, just a little bit northwest of Barrie. I want to welcome you, not only the small group of us who are here, but those who are joining us via live stream from Austria. Welcome to this celebration of life. We gather here today to remember and to celebrate Irma, and to be in community as we say goodbye to her. So whether you have a Christian faith, you may, but you may have a faith in this life and not in anything further, or you may be among those who are unsure about any of that. But what you share in common is a sense of loss at the death of one who was dear to you. And so acknowledging that we come with our own experience, our own memories, our own feelings, may we find in this time together both comfort and hope. I offer as my part in this service the affirmations that come from the Christian tradition, that every life is precious to the Creator who loves us, that sacred presence is with us from birth through life and through death into new life beyond this time and place. May we remember Irma with joy and say our goodbyes with courage. May we gather up strength so that we may live with hope and faith, celebrating the gift and goodness of life. I hope you can see the candles. Can you see the candles from over there? I can move them forward a little bit. There are 6 little tea lights here, and each one of them is symbolic, represents something. And so I'll say a few words about each candle as I light it, or maybe after I light it, and then I'll talk about it at the mic. The first candle symbolizes sacred presence with us in the world. This is to affirm that love's presence is always with us. We are never alone. This is the candle of loss, and we light this candle to say that sadness has a place here. Feeling sad is part of saying goodbye, and we will hold space for sorrow. This third candle represents the light of community, and we light this candle to remind ourselves that we're in this together, that we walk our life journey in community, helping each other when the road gets rough, sharing our sorrows, sharing our joys, and being human together with all that that means. This is the memory candle, and we light it for Irma, to affirm that her life is precious and is celebrated with gratitude by those who have walked the journey together with her. We light this candle to say that even in the darkest places and at the most difficult times, hope accompanies us. Hope for a more beautiful place, hope for a lovely and joyous time, hope for a better life, hope to be in the company of all of our loved ones, not only for ourselves and our loved ones, but for everyone. This last candle is the candle of love, and we light it to affirm that what matters most is love. Love overcomes fear and destroys hatred, and love outlives what we call death. Love gets the last word. At this time, I'm going to ask Martin if he'll come and share some of his thoughts and memories with us.
So I thought I would start by telling people who I am, although you guys already all know who I am, and I believe everyone who's watching does anyway. But since I went and put all the effort into my speech, I'm going to do it anyway. So Irma always referred to me as her godson, and I'll explain that a little bit more fully in just a moment. But my parents were friends with Irma and her husband Reinhard when they lived in Toronto, and I'd see them several times a year, usually for holidays, birthdays, that sort of thing. Although I didn't see her in person nearly as often after she and Reinhard moved to Barrie, she always kept up with weekly phone calls with my mom, and I would talk to her on the phone occasionally as well, so I often heard about what she was up to. During the past couple of years, she and I would talk on the phone more often, and sometimes she'd ask me for help or advice with things that came up in her life. During the past year, I helped her with her transition from living on her own at Grand Harbor to living at the Waterford, and then with her move to the Windsong unit at Waterford when that became necessary. Her husband Reinhard had died years ago, and Irma and Reinhard didn't have any children of their own, and she didn't have any family living here in Canada, so I was very moved by the fact that she trusted me enough to rely on me when she needed help and could no longer manage everything on her own. Hopefully my speech here isn't going to let her down. So now I'm going to take a little bit of a risk, and I'm going to try to say a few words in German for Irma's family in Austria. My German is very rusty, though. I don't get a chance to practice it often. So, ich möchte mich zuerst entschuldigen, weil ich in den letzten Jahren nicht viel Gelegenheit hatte, mein Deutsch zu üben und es deshalb etwas verrostet ist. Ich hoffe aber, Sie verstehen trotzdem, was ich sage und was ich meine. Ich möchte besonders Herbert Witzmann, Reinhards Neffen, meinen Dank aussprechen. Herbert hat mir bei den Vorbereiten für diese Todesfeier sehr geholfen und dafür gesorgt hat, dass Irmas Familie über ihren Tod informiert wird. Obwohl Irma fest in Kanada verwurzelt war und obwohl sie fast 70 Jahre in Kanada gelebt hat, sie bezeichnete Österreich und Bad Vöslau immer als ihre Heimat. Sie vergaß nie ihre Familie und eines ihrer wenigen Bedauern war, dass sie ihre Familie während der Pandemie und dann später, als sich ihr Gesundheitszustand verschlechterte, nicht besuchen konnte. Und jetzt mache ich weiter in English, so back to English now. I'm going to try and tell you a little bit about Irma. Irma Eichinger was born in a town called Bad Vöslau in Austria in 1937. She finished school at the age of 14 and began training as a floral designer. Although by our standards, that seems like a very young age to be picking a career, she told me that she enjoyed it right from the start and never regretted it and never wished she had done something else. So lucky her, it worked out well. She had met Reinhard Witzmann, her future husband, when she was a teenager. He came to Canada first, and she joined him in Canada in 1957 at the age of 20. They were married the next year in 1958, and you'll see back there's a picture of them from their wedding. They look a lot different in that picture than I ever remember them, because that's well before I was even born. She found work as a floral designer not long after coming to Canada and spent most of her working life at a shop called Hendrick's Florist in Toronto. Irma and Reinhard got to know my parents through another German immigrant who had been my dad's cabin mate on the boat trip to Canada in the early 1950s. At that time, the German economy and the Austrian one were still in recovery mode from the effects of the war, and many Germans emigrated, in search of a better life. But there were plenty of other Germans here in Canada, and as with many immigrant groups, they kind of found each other and decided that they were good company. When I was born in 1966, My parents didn't have any family here in Canada, and Reinhard had asked if he could be my godfather. My parents were very grateful for that offer. If you look at the photos on the monitor when that comes back on later or downstairs, you'll see an old black and white picture where a group of people are standing in front of a church. Reinhard and Irma on the right in the picture, and there's a man holding a baby. That baby is me, although you might not recognize me because I didn't have all this gray hair or a beard at that point. Irma decided that made her my godmother, and so that was that. Irma and Reinhard didn't have kids of their own or family in Canada, but they developed a circle of friends and they remained close to my parents. As a teenager, my parents and I would alternate Christmas dinner with Irma and Reinhard, one year at our home, next year at theirs. Irma once told me that cooking was a lot of work and that she didn't really enjoy cooking all that much, so she was perfectly happy with Reinhard always being the chef. While his turkey was always excellent, to this day I am unable to understand my parents and Irma and Reinhard's fondness for hot pickled red cabbage. Reinhard had a few jobs over the years, but he finished his career working for the LCBO as a bookkeeper. In the early 90s, the owner of Hendricks decided he was going to retire, and he told Irma that he was happy to sell the business to her, but if she didn't want it, he was just going to close it down. Irma proclaimed that she was too young to retire, and so then she became the owner of the shop. That, of course, meant that not only now did she have to do all the design work, but now she had to do all the administrative work as well and had all the responsibility on top of it. Fortunately, Reinhard had stopped working by that point, and he was her reliable assistant in the shop, making deliveries, keeping the books, doing whatever else was needed. When I got married in the early 90s, Irma provided all of the floral arrangements and all the table centerpieces as a wedding gift, and I quickly lost track of the number of compliments that we received from the guests. In a lot of ways, Irma and Reinhard lived a sort of modest life. They had a one-bedroom condo in Toronto, and they felt that was more than big enough for them, and they only had one car, as Irma never really drove. When they moved to Barrie, they ended up in a one-bedroom with a den, although I suspect that was because there weren't any smaller units available at the time. But being high-rise condo dwellers, they didn't have any of the maintenance or yard work that comes with a house. Irma once told me that she only shoveled snow once in her entire life. That was on a day when she needed to clear the sidewalk in front of her shop, and Reinhard wasn't there due to a medical appointment. She was very clear that she did not enjoy shoveling the snow, and that she told Reinhard that from then on he had to be there if there was even a chance of snow. After a few years of running her own business, she sold the shop, and she and Reinhard then began to enjoy their retirement, doing a lot of traveling. They spent a few more years in Toronto and then retired to their brand new condo in Barrie in 2001. Sadly, Reinhard's health took a turn for the worse a couple of years after their move, and he died in 2007 at the age of 71. Although Irma was devastated by that loss, she didn't throw in the towel in life and decided that she was going to enjoy life as much as possible, even if she had to do it on her own now. She traveled to Austria to visit her family almost every year, went on quite a number of trips and cruises on her own. When she'd get back from these trips, she'd always have a story about having quickly made friends with some couple or group that she met, and so she was always in good company. She traveled to the tip of South America, took an Arctic cruise to Alaska, many places in between. When she was home in Barrie, she made friends with many of the people in her building and almost always had an invitation to Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner from a neighbor. As she wasn't really a fan of cooking, she had told me that she preferred to reciprocate by taking them out to dinner. Irma indulged her love of floral design and decorating to decorate her home for every season and holiday. She volunteered to decorate the lobby in her building for Christmas every year and was active in the building's social events. Although standing up at a work table for over 40 years doing floral arranging had given her back problems that often made it hard for her, she once told me that if she didn't volunteer to do the decorations in the lobby, the building would probably hire someone who would charge a lot and maybe not do a good job. So sore back or not, she was going to do it. On one of her last outings in December of 2025, this was already after she was living at the Waterford, we went back to her condo, and she looked around the lobby, saw that it had been decorated for Christmas, and admitted that whoever had done it that year had done a good job. So professional courtesy, I guess, to whoever had done that. In the late spring of 2025, Irma had fallen while coming in from her balcony. She didn't have the strength to get to her feet, couldn't reach her phone, and so after spending 2 days on the floor, she was able to drag herself to the front door and call out to a passing neighbor in the hall who heard her and got help. And I've learned today that that neighbor was actually Jean, who's sitting here in the front row. So Jean, thank you very much for your help and the difficult story that you told me about that day and how hard it was to get the door open. When I came up to see Irma in the hospital, one of the first things she said was that it was not safe for her to live at home anymore and that she needed to move to a retirement home. This came as a bit of a surprise to me because up to that point, she had always said that she didn't want to move to a retirement home because those places are full of old people. No insult to anyone who's living there. There you go. Now, she had stayed at the Waterford retirement home for respite care many years earlier after having a heart valve replacement, and she had already decided years ago that when her time came, that was the place she wanted to go. Okay, so I thanked her for at least making that part of this process easier. So after a stint in the hospital after this fall, she moved to the Waterford in August of 2025. By that point, she needed a walker to get around, but she was still able to get around and help make decisions about what to move into her new home. And she seemed to settle in pretty nicely and was very pleased with how we had been able to recreate the look and feel of her condo in the smaller one-bedroom unit she had at the Waterford. Unfortunately, her body wasn't very cooperative anymore, and she was back in the hospital in the fall, and then again another time over the Christmas holidays. When she was ready to leave in January, it was clear that she now needed a much higher level of care, and that meant moving to a different section at the Waterford where there were more staff who could provide the care she needed. Irma was not happy about having to move again, particularly since it meant moving to a studio unit on the ground floor. And I'm not exactly sure why, but she always liked to be high up. In Toronto, they lived in a building where they were up close to the 30th floor. They were on the top floor here at Grand Harbor, and although she was on the 6th floor at the Waterford initially, not super high, but it had a nice view and she was happy there. But the reality was that this was what needed to be done now. So my son Dorian and I became furniture movers once again. I'd like to offer a thanks to Dorian, who's watching this with my mom from Toronto right now, for all of his help, particularly for someone he'd only met a couple of times very briefly in his life. So thanks, Dorian. Once Irma got into her new room, she was happy with the way we had set up the furniture, and she and I spent the better part of a day hanging up much of her extensive artwork collection in her room. At the end, she did say how happy she was how it turned out, and once again, the look and feel of her condo was recreated, this time in just a single room. Now, for those of you who've never been to her home, which doesn't, well, you've never been to her home, Judith, but some of her family may not have been there. It was beautifully and elaborately decorated in a style that Mozart and his contemporaries would have found appropriate. Unfortunately, however, her body still was not cooperating, and from the time she got back to the Waterford in early February, she had to use a wheelchair. But despite having to rely on others for pretty much everything by that point, she was always in good spirits whenever I came to see her or talk to her on the phone. After she passed, I spoke to some of the staff at the Waterford who were more hands-on with her, and they confirmed that she had earned a bit of a reputation as a sweetheart. So I was happy to hear that because it meant she wasn't just putting on a brave face for me, and that she really was making the best of the situation. Now, I don't think Irma was really the kind who would put on a show or a brave face, because she could often be kind of blunt and didn't often feel the need to restrain her thoughts when it was something she didn't like. But I was glad to know she wasn't just sitting there feeling sorry and miserable for herself. On Sunday, April the 5th, Waterford called me, told me that Irma had been non-responsive when they went into her room that morning, and that the paramedics were in the process of taking her to the hospital. Although I went up to see her that same day, by the time I got to the hospital, she was no longer aware of my presence or of anything else really. Doctors were very clear that there really wasn't much that could be done other than keeping her comfortable. After she moved from the ER to a private room, I made sure she had enough blankets, was tucked in, said goodbye, and left. 3 hours later, at 1 a.m. on the 6th, hospital called and said she had passed. And so now, here we are at the same funeral home where Reinhardt's funeral was held 19 years ago. Now, before I sit down, there's a couple of things that I'm going to explain. The first is with respect to these urns. You can see that there are two of them. This one has Irma's name on it. And why are there two, you may ask? Well, Irma wanted to be cremated, and so she's in the red one. The green one, well, it's green in some light, but it looks more blue in this light, so whichever color you prefer. But that's been Reinhardt's home for the last 19 years. For most of that time, he's kept an eye on Irma from a place in her dining room cabinet. Now, those of you who knew Reinhardt, you'll remember that he was quite tall, even taller than me, and I don't have an explanation for how he ended up in an urn that is so much smaller. Maybe it's a sign of who really wore the pants in that relationship, or maybe it's just best not to look into those details too much. But in any event, Reinhardt's been in my living room since Dorian and I cleaned out Irma's condo, and I thought it would be appropriate that he'd come and join us today. Now, I did talk to Irma about her wishes, and she told me that she would like her and Reinhardt's ashes to be scattered someplace nice. When the weather finally sees fit to get nice, if it ever does this year, I'll look for an appropriate spot, probably someplace with flowers. You'll see there's also a floral arrangement there. As you were aware, Irma was a floral designer by trade, and even after she retired, she still loved her floral arrangements and displays. Those of you who were in her home, you know that she had some sort of floral arrangement on just about every flat surface in the place. It was actually a little bit of a problem when she had to move from her condo to the Waterford, and then again when she had to move from her one-bedroom unit to the studio unit, because she really, really wanted to bring all of her many arrangements with her, despite the much reduced space she was moving into. It was actually one of the few sources of friction between her and I when I had to tell her that some of them need to stay behind because there just isn't room for all of them. So maybe as my late atonement for having to tell her no, she couldn't bring it all, we've had this prepared today. Although, Irma, one last time, you cannot bring this with you. And lastly, there are these little guys here, which I would invite you to come up and take a closer look at when we're done here. They are chickens. Now, it's certainly the first time I've seen chickens at a funeral, but there is a reason for this. Irma and Reinhardt had pet names for each other. They called each other Hendel. Now, as a child, I had no idea what that meant. It was only as an adult that I learned that that actually meant rooster in the Austrian dialect of German. Now, how they came to those pet names is unknown to me, and I don't know if any of her family knows where that came from. My mother could no longer recall if she ever knew. But at some point, while they were still living in Toronto, Irma came across these little chickens and thought it was a cute and fitting addition to her collection of treasures, her extensive collection of treasures. They were in her dining room cabinet, and since she and Reinhardt are together here, I thought they'd be a nice reminder that Irma also had a playful side. So, if you've never had to do it, writing a eulogy is actually kind of hard. But even the best eulogy is never really going to be able to convey a person's entire life and personality in just a few minutes. Everybody would have known a different aspect of Irma, but I hope that whatever stage of her life you knew her at, that your memories of her are happy ones. Irma lived a long life. She was independent and enjoying life until very near the end. We should all be so lucky. Thank you for coming here today and for listening to me ramble on.
I didn't know Irma, but I would have connected with her on the red cabbage. I grew up with that in my Dutch household tradition. I'm just going to invite you to sit for a few minutes as we listen to some music and just sit with your own feelings and memories and thoughts that may have come to the surface as you were listening to Martin speak. And when the music is finished, I will come and offer some words as well. Thank you. I want to offer a reading from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible. These words will be familiar to you, I'm sure, and then I'll offer a brief reflection. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. Most often when I'm asked to officiate at a celebration of life for someone I never had the opportunity to meet, I gather with family members a few days before the service and invite them to introduce me to their loved one through their stories and memories. And even when I spend only an hour or so in their company, I'm often left with a palpable sense of the presence of that loved one and a strong impression of their personhood. So Martin, I'm so grateful to you for the conversation we had the other day and for what you've been able to share with us all today, and for opening for me a few doors of introduction. Still, because I never actually met Irma, and because there are not so many storytellers around this time for me to chat with, I decided to introduce my brief reflection in the form of a letter from me to Irma. So I'll begin by reading that. Dear Irma, it was never my privilege to actually meet you, and yet here I am, officiating at the celebration of your life, for which your family and friends have gathered, and that in itself is an honor for which I am grateful. I didn't know you, but I think I know a few things about you. I know that you loved beauty, Irma, and that you expressed this by arranging flowers of myriad colors and shapes and sizes into the loveliest combinations. I know that you were enterprising and capable and persistent. These are necessary qualities for someone who runs their own business. I know that you must not have been short on courage. I am the daughter of European immigrants, and I have some idea of what it takes to leave a homeland and start all over again in an unfamiliar country and culture. And then 5 decades later, when you lost your husband Reinhard, you started over again, fostering new friendships, traveling, discovering new places and experiences. I would have loved to have met you, Irma, but that was not to be. Instead, I am here to help those who knew you well, to frame your life and everything it has meant and continues to mean in the context of hope. I will do my very best to honor you in this. Sincerely, Judith. There are 2 very good reasons for gathering together for this kind of service: to support each other in sadness and loss, and to celebrate a life well lived. But there's a 3rd reason we're here in this chapel. We're here to do what faith and hope call us to do when a loved one dies. We are here to do the very human task of saying our last goodbyes to one that we love, and to do it in a way that tells again the story of our spiritual journeying. We're here to stand together in hope, as generations have done before us, shoulder to shoulder, to rehearse yet again the promise that is offered to us by our faith traditions, that life will overcome death once and for all. It takes some faith, that good news story, it takes some faith. It's not something we can prove or measure in any kind of rational way. I have questions too, of course, and no definitive answers. But I decided long ago that life is not only about what can be proven in scientific ways. Just because we cannot see or touch or measure a thing doesn't mean that it isn't or can't be true. Our deepest truths reside somewhere other than in our rational minds. It is in those deep places that we know about things like love and honor and hope and faith, the things that really matter, in my estimation. The Christian faith tradition offers us the wisdom of our forebears, who thought about these things that clearly mattered to them as well. They were people who wondered, as we do, about what life really means. Like that ancient philosopher whose words come to us from the book of Ecclesiastes, those words that remind us that life has its seasons, its hard times and its good times. Time to be born, time to die, a time to laugh, a time to weep, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak up. This was wisdom 2,300 years ago, and it is still wisdom today. But this poem, this wisdom, I would submit, is not only about this life. The words that I read from Ecclesiastes point us to the bigger picture. They invite us into the hope that there's yet another season of life, one that is still mystery to us, yet profoundly true. A realm or dimension inexplicable, yet real. The Christian church tries to find words for this hope. In the United Church context, that's mine, we often recite a faith statement called a new creed, and it ends with these words: in life, in death, in life beyond death, God is with us. We are not alone. Thanks be to God. And the church tells stories about other ancient voices, like those accounts of Jesus telling people that God can be trusted, that life is not only about what we eat and drink and how we make money, but about all those unmeasurable and inexplicable and uncontainable things like love and honor and hope and faith. Oh, and life beyond death. Let me not forget to mention that. In one of his final conversations with his friends, Jesus reassures them that death is not the end of everything. Don't worry about this dying business, he says to them. Death is not the end, no matter what it looks like. There is a place where we will all someday gather, rest assured, and in the meantime, be at peace. I'm still going to be with you in spirit. So let not your hearts be troubled. That is the Christian message. That is the hope that is proffered. That is the assurance that we are invited into, that even in the mystery of what happens when we cross over the divide between this life and the next, we can rest assured that we are never, ever alone on the journey. We are invited to gather up whatever faith we can muster, always better done together than alone, and to lean into the promise that tells us that life is forever, that we can safely bless Irma on her way, and that the season for dancing and embracing and laughing will surely come again. I invite you to still your hearts with me as I lead in a prayer. Source of life and love, we give thanks for Irma, for all that was good in her life, and for the memories we treasure. Thank you for the years she shared with Reinhard. Thank you for the friends she made and the ways that she shared her life with others. Thank you for her creativity, her appreciation of beauty, and the many times she brought beauty into the experience of others. We are grateful for the ways in which Irma's life was woven within and through the lives of those who knew and loved her. And now in hope, we hold out the promise of continuing life. We trust that beyond absence, there is a presence, that beyond brokenness, there can be healing, that beyond silence, there may be a word. May those who mourn Irma be drawn together as they care for each other. Faith offers the promise that Irma is in a place of peace and joy. Encourage us to reach for that promise, to hold it, and to live into the hope that one day we will be together again. For love is stronger than death. Amen. If you're able to stand comfortably, I invite you to do that now for the words of committal. If you want to remain seated, that's okay too. With thanksgiving for the life lived and the love shared, we release Irma, even as she is surely held in love forever. Her ashes will be committed to the ground, but I submit that Irma has journeyed on from this life to another dimension beyond time and space, and so I offer these words to bless her on her way. Irma, go peacefully on your journey. Go confidently toward those who have gone before you. May they hold you precious till we meet again. And let's us be blessed for our journeying. In our past and in our future, in our fears and in our hopes, in our tears and in our laughter, there is always love. Above us and below us, surrounding us and enveloping us with light and peace, there is always love. Let us go from this time and place blessed. That concludes the service. I think maybe I can extend the invitation to reception. There's some lunch in the building here, and thank you so much.